Jesus said if a person wanted to be great, that the path of greatness is paved with servanthood. Jesus implied that if you want to be great, you must be a servant. That makes John not only a strong disciple of Jesus, but it makes him a really great man, a very admirable example for each one of us. I had never noticed before how much in the book that bears his name, just how much John intentionally turns the spotlight away from himself. His name means to whom the Lord is gracious, or whom the Lord has graciously given. His father was Zebedee, his mother Salome, you know her, Jesus' mother's sister. And that makes John the disciple Jesus' cousin. And this becomes very powerful when you remember Jesus on the cross amidst his agony, spiritual warfare. After the full absorption of human sin, Jesus entrusts the care of his mother to John. And from the time he becomes a disciple, he reveals deep giftedness and spiritual potential. He has to learn, however, to fight some of his inner ambitions. He has to learn how to surrender to a higher calling of God in his life until he reaches a place of maturity where he stops seeking seats and stations and status and selection. And instead, he surrenders to being shaped by a spirituality that empowers him to offer surrender, service, sacrifice, and selflessness. This book that bears his name portrays John as a loyal and faithful follower of Jesus, so much so that he becomes a part of the inner circle. We read it repetitively throughout the gospel: Peter, James, John. They were privileged to witness Jesus' raising of the daughter of Jairus from the dead. They witnessed Jesus' transfiguration upon the mountain. They bear witness to Jesus' agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. But interestingly enough, Mount Ararat, all John will ever write about himself is that he is one whom the Lord loved. He has family connections, strong participation in the movement, influence among the disciples, and intense love for Jesus. Yet he posts no childhood selfies of he and Jesus on Instagram. He does no bragging of having insider knowledge of the power and person of Jesus, who is, by the way, the one sent from God, the Messiah himself. He is the one to witness Jesus' crucifixion and the first to observe the empty tomb. And in our focal text, he is the unnamed disciple that beats Peter to the tomb. But John was surprisingly simple, and I hope you heard it in the reading of the text. So let me rehearse it for you again. John, in his own book, says this: the other disciple, talking about himself, beat Peter to the tomb. Now, I can understand being the other in somebody else's book. Are y'all here? But John is so simple. He knew Jesus was the Christ, and he pressed the theme in his gospel without using Jesus' greatness as a platform to promote his own. And here is, I suspect, the obvious point the Lord is pressing among us this weekend. John offers us a spiritual discipline hardly ever mentioned in these days of excessive self-promotion, profile addiction, this time of show-all and tell-all display. John saw tremendous value in, or maybe we could say he felt the need for the necessary sacrifice of, which of these I do not know. But John pulls us closer to Jesus because we don't have to peel back the layers of distraction from John spending too much time talking about himself. Because John exercises modesty. we get a chance to hear more of what Jesus has to say and to glean more of what Jesus did, because John, while present and often actively participating, he works intentionally to ensure that he doesn't interfere with us or others being inspired, challenged, hopefully transformed by Jesus's work, his words, and his witness. John teaches the virtue and the value of living modest. Let the church say modesty. He doesn't post pictures. He doesn't hashtag captions of he and Jesus, even though he's part of the inner circle. He didn't constantly talk about his positioning, posturing, privilege, his proximity, or his perks. In fact, throughout the gospel, he never refers to himself or James directly. Only in the last chapter does he even mention the sons of Zebedee. In fact, he lets John the Baptist have such of the name spotlight that he can simply refer to him as John, because he never lets his own name compete. Are y'all listening to me? In John chapter 1, it indicates that he was simply John the Baptist's disciple who hears the wilderness prophet say when Jesus makes his appearance, "Behold the Lamb of God." It is then that disciple John begins to follow Jesus. He was there when Jesus turned water into wine at the wedding reception in Cana of Galilee. He is among all the gospel accounts that remember he, the only one of all the gospel writers, he's the only one who remembers that at that wedding reception, there were 6 stone water jars used for ceremonial washing that become the containers for the working of Jesus's miracle. John is so on his game. He's so on spot. He's so up close and personal that he knew the capacity of each of the jars when he says that each one held 20 to 30 gallons, but he never mentions his own name. When Jesus fed the multitude of 5,000 that late evening, John is the only one who knows what kind of bread the young lad had that was multiplied by Jesus. He's the only writer who mentions that it was barley, so detail-oriented, so close, so attentive, but John doesn't mention his own name. When the disciples are trying to row across the lake towards Capernaum, only John mentions the precise distance that each of them have to row when he says it was somewhere between 3 and 3.5 miles. But again, John doesn't even mention his own name. He's up close and observant when Mary anoints Jesus's feet, and he describes it best when he says right there that fragrance filled the whole house, but he never tells us his name. Doesn't tell us where he is in the house, who he might have been talking to, what he might have been talking about. Let me tell you, John could have upstaged Peter and probably could have placed himself as proverbial leader of the pack, both during Jesus's public ministry and with the ministry in general post-resurrection. And yet John teaches us, Mount Ararat, the virtue and the value of offering God the spiritual discipline of modesty. I preach this because we Christians cannot fall victim to the excessive overexposure that is dominating public exchange these days. The overconsumption with self-image and exterior presentation, excessive verbosity and insensitive conversational exchange, too much outer shell sharing, too much personal and private and sacred exposure. These days, everybody is showing everything, sharing everything, expressing anything in whatever way makes them feel comfortable. Jesus exposes John to teach the virtue of modesty. And in my feeble attempt to best define and describe it, modesty is finding value in becoming little so that the grand presence of Jesus makes the loudest and most pronounced statement about the quality of your life, the strength of your person, the disclosure of who you are within the mystery of your life. We Christians have to trust the Lord that modesty makes us more faithful witnesses than unfiltered transparency or excessive picture and portrait exposure, sharing thoughts that ought to be strained through the lens of our spirituality and not filtered through our anger or our risky freedom. Is anybody listening to me? It's spiritual sobriety. It's the spiritual sobriety to not share every picture, exposing the whole of who you are, to not state every opinion, to not comment on every subject. You don't have to brag about all your possessions. Have some restraint and not showcase every manifestation of divine or natural favor. Don't expose all your sacred spaces or share all your secret thoughts or expose all your venting frustrations. Some places when you show up, don't seek center stage. Let somebody else shine for a change, because it's better to be low and Jesus asks you to come up than to be high and the world have to pull you down. Do I have a witness? It's the discipline to scale back so that he can be center focused. It's let me bite my tongue so that Jesus can impact others' thoughts, opinions, and emotions. Modesty. Let the church say modesty. Here it is. Jesus is not in our lives to make us share less. Jesus is in our lives to make us share differently. And part of that different is to tap the curiosity in others until others have to wonder what makes you special, what keeps you so centered. How could you have lost a son, a daughter, a sibling, a spouse? How could you have been severed off the job? How could you go 15 plus months and still talk so positive and steward such joy? What makes such a difference in your life? And Jesus says, exercise, surrender to me some modesty so folk don't get confused. So that everybody knows he is the difference in our lives. I declare to y'all, I'm trying to hold my shout back. Jesus teaches in this text through John's life that you can't outshine Jesus ever. You can't outshine him ever. So rather than living a life in an attempt to outshine him, choose rather to surrender to being defined by him. John let what he exposes about Jesus define who he must be. If he had witnessed all these miracles, heard all these messages, witnessed all this ministry, healings, feedings, revelations, spiritual disclosures, we already know this. We know he must be some kind of personality.